What the scariest true story, you know that is 100% true. I've told this story before. I'm an eye doctor, and I had a patient come to me with an infected eyelid that two other eye doctors tried to treat and failed. They were dumping all sorts of medicine into it, and it wasn't getting any better. At this point, it was swollen and painful for weeks, with no improvement, despite being on tons of meds. Apparently, neither of them thought to flip the lid upside down. You know that gross trick some kids do with their upper eyelids. It was a painful maneuver for her very swollen eyelid, which might explain it. Anyhow, there appeared to be what looked like a visible abscess inside the tissue with thick gooey material. I thought I'd give it a nudge and saw it move. This wasn't an abscess, it was something else. I managed to remove it quite easily in one whole piece. It was a fly larva. The patient told me that she had a bug hit her in the eye. A few days before she got this infection, I removed the larva, and within 2 days the wound closed, and she was 100% recovered on basic antibiotic eye drops. Yes, I do have the photos from this case for those interested. Too long. Didn't read. Patient had a bug lay an egg in her eyelid, and I removed the larva. The story of Jamie Klaus is terrifying. In rural Wisconsin last year, a 13 to 14-ish-year-old girl went missing after her parents were murdered in their home. Police arrived within 4 minutes or so, but she's just gone. Of course, speculation is that she was kidnapped, or that she was in on it, or dead, or whatever. Nobody knows because she has completely vanished. 88 days later, in the dead of a northern Wisconsin winter, she runs out into the street to a woman walking her dog. She had been held captive about 40 minutes from her home. All of that is scary enough, but here's the terrifying part. She had never had any contact with the guy that murdered her family and abducted her. One day he was driving to a new job, at which he only lasted a day, and saw her get on the school bus. At that moment, he decided that he was going to take her. There was no warning, no grooming. There was absolutely nothing that she or her family could have done to avoid everything. A creepy young man saw her from 100 away and decided that he would murder her family and take her for himself. Jamie is my cousin. Of course, no one wants to assume the worst, but by the time she had managed to escape, we had all pretty much assumed she was dead. The emotional roller coaster of finding her alive after my aunt and uncle had been killed like that was insane. It was just crazy seeing the story in all of these magazines, having classmates talking to me about her without realizing my connection, seeing America grieve with my family over this tragedy, etc. For the longest time I didn't allow myself to feel anything, because I had the mentality I was too far removed, as a cousin who had only met them a couple times, and closer family and friends had it worse than me. Then to see other people who didn't even know them crying was just weird. It almost made me mad. Now I'm getting to a better point with grieving and can appreciate the entire community coming together and stuff, but I'm still emotionally confused about the whole situation. The murder of the Grine family. A deranged pedo named Joseph Edward Duncan was already on the run from the cops for a past sexual assault. He was incredibly charming and manipulative and was truly pure evil. He camped outside a family's rural home, unseen by them. He picked it out after driving past it and seeing children's toys outside. He watched them from afar, got to know their routine with the intent of kidnapping the children. 10-year-old Dylan, 8-year-old Shasta. Jed found the lock on the door was broken, entered the home in the middle of the night and tied up the mom, dad and teenage son. He put Shasta and Dylan in his car and killed the rest of the family with a hammer. He traveled around various campsites and cabins, with Shasta and Dylan captive, sexually abusing, torturing and raping them. He eventually shot Dylan, but Shasta talked him out of killing her. Jed ended up telling her she taught him how to love. The scariest part is a CCTV footage of Jed and Shasta at a gas station. Because you could easily believe they were just a normal dad and a grumpy daughter if you were an onlooker. Eventually, he took her to a dino, where he was finally apprehended when a waitress noticed something was up, and Shasta was saved after 7 weeks in his clutches. As he was dragged away, he called to her, "Promise me you'll visit me in prison," and she said she would. I don't know if she ever did. Jed was put on death row and found to be guilty of 3 previous child murders. He died a few months ago from cancer. But the worst part of it all is how horrible Shasta's life has been afterwards. Drug addiction, in and out of jail, losing her children, etc. Just the most horrifying story ever. I was on vacation in Ithaca with my boyfriend at the time. We had literally, I'm talking 10 minutes, just gotten into town and stopped at a suspension bridge near Cornell's campus. I'm terrified of heights, and so my boyfriend was coaxing me step by step over the bridge. It was gorgeous, and we stopped at the middle to take a picture. On the side we had come from, there was a parking lot with steps leading to the bottom of the gorge, but on the far side there were hiking paths with no barrier. A woman walked past us and offered to take a picture for us. We declined, and she smiled and walked quickly to the far side of the bridge, where she smoothly jumped off into the gorge. There was not a second of hesitation. It was almost like she expected the path to keep going. The sound of a person hitting the ground from a jump like that sticks with you. I was about 15 minutes from finishing the night shift at work when there was a massive crash on one of the windows in the office, so I get up and go to check it out. Someone has thrown quite a sizable rock through one of the windows on the front of the building. This is made especially weird because I'm working in the industrial district. At 11:30 at night with none of the other businesses open, I go back to my desk, put a quick call through to security to let them know, and decide to head home. As I'm leaving the building, I'm freaking myself out about it more and more, and end up running to my car, getting in and taking off. I'm almost home, and I've started to calm down a bit when I realize that I didn't unlock my car when I got in. It had been unlocked the whole time. I do a quick check with my hand in the back seat for any possible murders that might be hanging around there, but there's nothing there. Fast forward 30 minutes, I've called a friend of mine who says he's out drinking, so I decide I'm going to join him. I jump on my bicycle and start riding over. I'm doodling along the road on my bike. It's a nice night, and I'm in no big rush, just enjoying the moonlight when I hear someone riding behind me. I straighten up and stick to one side of the road. He passes me really slowly, and when he is right beside me, he shoots me a smile I can describe as purely fucking insane. I kind of flinch and am taken aback as he rides on. That's when I realize he is riding my mom's bike. Needless to say, I sprint the fuck home. When I get there, sure enough, her bike is missing and one of my car's doors is open, the back left one. I was driving and had no need to open that door. I was playing around with a radio once when I was a kid, just slowly spanning through the static trying to find a station. I had found an old television antenna, attached it to the side of our house, and ran a wire out my window to it, with an alligator clip attached to the radio antenna, allowing me to get a way broader range of signals. So I'm sitting there, early in the morning, like 2 a.m., slowly sweeping frequencies, and suddenly, I get to this station that's playing this very weird crackling sound. It sounded sort of like cracking knuckles, or maybe Rice Krispies cereal, but with a fixed, rhythmic pattern instead of being random. I sat there listening to it for a second, then it suddenly stopped, and this faint voice says, "It doesn't work. We're already dead. We're already dead." It took a second for the weight of the words to hit me, but when they did, I freaked the f*** out and almost threw the radio across the room. I'm pretty sure it was just someone messing around with a radio transmitter, but damn if it didn't scare the shit out of me at the time. My parents bought their first house back in 1972. It was a fixer-upper, but they decided to move in right away and fix things as time, money permitted. Within a few days of moving in, the new neighbors came over to introduce themselves. They also let my parents know that the previous owners had moved out after a nasty divorce. They had lost their second baby from SIDS, and their relationship went downhill from there. My parents were horrified, more so because they were newly pregnant and couldn't imagine going through such a thing. They eventually pretty much forgot all about it. Life went on. They were in love with their new life and their new house. In preparation for the baby, they decided to wallpaper the nursery. Now, my dad told my mom there was no need in wallpapering the inside of the closet, but she insisted. She was kneeling down, scraping off old paint inside of the closet, when her eyes fell upon something that made her blood turn to ice. Written in crayon, at about eye level for a kindergartner, in childish scrawl was, "I killed the baby." About a year ago, I was climbing a tree in my front yard at around 4:30 am. I had walked a lady friend to her car, and was killing time until I got the "I'm home" text, and the weather was nice for tree climbing, so I just did it. This particular night my neighbors didn't lock their gate, like they normally do, leaving easy access to their tool shed, lawn mower, etc. I guess the guy forgot. It happens, but it was definitely noticeable. Large gate, right next to the road, expensive old man tools. So as I observed the gate from my lofty perch and considered all of the reasons it would be open, I noticed a car coming down my street very slowly, eventually coming to a halt right in front of my neighbor's driveway. I looked into the car and saw two young men pointing and looking intently around his yard. Sketchy shit during daylight, much more so at night. After a minute or so of being too nervous to do anything at all, I realized I was leaning pretty heavy on some branches, exposing myself more than when these two had just driven up. That was when it happened. The guy in the passenger seat noticed me first. He did a panicky sort of double take when he first saw me, followed by what I generally assumed to be the words, "Oh shit," and rapidly punching the driver in the arm, attempting to look menacing. I did the only thing I could think of, which was hold my arms up in a claw-like pose, like a T-Rex. When the driver saw me, he did the same panicky double take before slamming the gas and hauling us out to Dodge. I like to think I was the creepiest, scariest thing those two ever saw. I used to work in a trailer park for my parents. Quite often, people would start using methamphetamine, begin to fall behind on rent and get evicted. Whenever we evicted someone, their trailer was usually too torn to shit to actually do anything useful with it. Essentially, to prevent having a pile of shit trailer in the middle of the park, we'd buy it from them and just tear it down. Anyway, the scary, creepy part. Many of these occupants had children. More than half of all the children's rooms I found had locks on the doors from the outside. Inside the children's rooms, it was always quite evident that the kids would sometimes be locked inside 4 days at a time, due to the bathroom corners that would sometimes appear. The doors on the insides of the rooms typically had scratch marks along the edge of the door and the door frame. Getting rid of all of the stuff inside before beginning demolition always frightened me. I was always afraid that I'd end up finding a dead child somewhere among the filth. It never happened, but the odds of it potentially happening were, in my opinion, quite high. One of the scariest things I ever heard was when I worked in retail. My store used to do layaway, and that was where I worked. Right by the layaway counter, we had 3 bathrooms: a men's multi-stall, a women's multi-stall, and a family bathroom. Well, only the family bathroom had a door that locked, all the others had the pull swing door. I was in the back cleaning up and I thought I hear screamings, so I walked out front by the counter. I heard more screaming. I was not sure at first where it was coming from. I ran and checked the men's and women's bathroom, and they were empty, and I still heard the crying and screaming. It was coming from the family bathroom. I banged on the door, but the yelling, screaming, crying kept going on. It sounded like a child, and I had no idea what was going on. I called for a manager because I had no way of getting in the door since it was locked. This whole time, there is still crying, screaming, banging. After several attempts of trying to open the door, we called 911. We had no idea what was going on, but it didn't sound good. I think about 15 minutes at this point, although it felt forever. Then the sound check stopped. No more banging, crying, nothing. We banged on the door until the police came. When they finally did, they had to kick the door in, since we had no key. As we all stood around and looked in, all we saw was blood all over the place. We were not really sure what happened at first, but the police told us to back up. And that is when they pulled out a lady and a child. A bloody child, maybe 3. We all just stood there in shock. The child was not moving. We thought he was dead because of all the blood. They took the lady away in handcuffs and the child to the hospital. We all had to give statements. Later, my manager told me what happened. They just snapped. He wouldn't stop crying, and she just had enough, and did whatever she could to make him stop. He did live. I was sure he was dead, but he wasn't. She had just knocked him out from hitting him so hard. This story is not scary in the ghost sense, but for that to happen right behind the door, and not know what is going on or be able to help, was pretty scary to me. A guy I was good friends with had a party one night and called me to invite me over. It was me and my wife's first day off together in a while, and our daughter was 2 years old. I mentioned it to my wife, and my daughter said, "No, don't go, Daddy." Of course, I can't resist that, so I stayed home, and we had a good night. My friend, however, had the worst night of his life. His party was going well and everything was fine, even though there was a friend of a friend there who no one really knew. Turns out the stranger had been smoking PCP and decided to start killing people. He took a butcher knife and slashed 3 people's throats. My friend's wife threw their kids out of a 2-story window and jumped out herself, took them into the woods and called the police. All 3 people died. The police found the guy walking down the side of the road, covered in blood and incoherent. He had no idea what he just did. So he said, "What really pisses me off is he was such a good guy. He was a big biker-looking teddy bear, was never an asshole to anyone, and always did what was the right thing. We worked together and hit it off from day one. Always ready with a joke and smile. Maybe not going saved my life, or maybe I could have helped. That weighs on me even 20 years later. The fact that some little past destroyed the lives of 3 good families that he didn't even know really pisses me off, and I hope he rots in prison and gets his ass kicked every day. Rip Blaine. You were a good man. Edit. My friend was one of the 3 murdered that night. Sorry I wasn't specific about that. I may have had a few beers. The USS West Virginia was a ship damaged during the attack on Pearl Harbor. After the ship was attacked, the people on board heard banging noises coming from inside the ship. Turns out that these noises were people. They were trapped in a room to where they couldn't be broken out of it because of the water that would seep in and drown them, and they couldn't be brought out from the top because of the gases that lingered there that were extremely flammable. When the vessel was salvaged 6 months later, the bodies of these 3 men were found. The other things that remained were empty cans of food and water, and a calendar marked from December 7th to December 23rd. This means they were trapped in there for 16 days. They probably kept wondering if they were ever going to make it out, and then had to come to the realization that they might not be saved, and they had the fear of drowning in the tight little compartment of the ship. They had to face the realization that you are going to die, and the psychological torture that goes along with it. Tsujigiri, literally crossroads killing, is a Japanese term for a practice when a samurai, after receiving a new katana, or developing a new fighting style or weapon, tests its effectiveness by attacking a human opponent, usually a random defenseless passer-by. In many cases, during night time. I can't imagine how terrifying it must have been, being an innocent traveler, walking a trail at night, when suddenly an elite swordsman just materializes from the shadows and begins butchering you and your family, just for fun, and he's going to get away with it too. Because this was during the lawless Sengoku period, when samurai were a protected elite class. It's just disturbing to me. Edit. Apparently, there is a Japanese historian that argues that the intentions of these killings may not always be for merely testing blades, and that a more common reason might be robbery. But regardless of the circumstances surrounding it, what is known for certain is that innocent passer-by are being slain from the shadows by an untouchable elite class during the Sengoku. Honestly, I don't care about motive. The end result is civilians being dismembered and disemboweled randomly, and in the dark of night for lols and or money. What radiation poisoning does to you, if you're not lucky enough to die quickly. The worst case that I can think of outside of the Chernobyl incident was the case of Hisashi Ouchi, a Japanese plant worker, who was exposed to fatal amounts of radiation, but thanks to his family and the doctors, he was kept alive against his will for 83 goddamn days. A week into the hospital he said, "I can't take it anymore. I am not a guinea pig," yet the doctors continued on. When he died, all of his skin had fallen off. All of the skin grafts had fallen off. He'd lost multiple limbs, and he was suffering heart attacks multiple times a day. There are pictures of him on his hospital bed that if you've been around the internet long enough, you'll know as part of the original Shocking Images collection. It looks like it came straight out of a torture porn movie. I sometimes work on the grounds of a nuclear power plant and always said that if the worst happened and I was exposed to a lethal amount of radiation, that I would just kill myself rather than suffer something like that. Was working the evening shift at a gas station. Man comes in all disoriented. I go to help him out. He has a gash on his head and doesn't know where he was. I couldn't see any crashes around, so assumed he had fallen, or something. Normally we are supposed to stay inside the glass-shielded register area whenever anyone is in the store. I, being a nice human being, went to help while calling the police, EMS. They got there and checked him out. They thought his head may have been fractured, took him to the emergency room. I went back to work. Cops stopped back by for some coffee a few hours later. They told me the guy got hit by a baseball bat trying to break into a little girl's bedroom and was wanted for rape and murder into other states. I never left the register area at night again.